CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories this hour. Thousands attend the funeral of a young protester killed in Myanmar. The UK prepares to reveal a roadmap out of lockdown as the Prime Minister vows every adult will get a vaccine by July. And in sport, Novak Djokovic wins his 9th Australian Open title, earning the Serbian tennis player his 18th Grand Slam. Huge rallies are continuing in Myanmar as a backlash grows at the killing of 2 protesters. There have been weeks of protests in the country after the army seized power from the elected government led by Aung San Suu Kyi. International condemnation of the military's actions is growing, as Liz Whittaker explains.
Crowds lining the streets for the funeral of one young protester in the capital, Naypyidaw. Mia Twik Twik Kine was shot in the head by police during a protest 10 days previously. She died in hospital on Friday, just after her 20th birthday. Local media says 2 other protesters were shot dead by police on Saturday during a workers' strike at a shipyard in the city of Mandalay. One was shot in the head, the other in the chest. But on Sunday, tens of thousands returned to the streets, seemingly undeterred.
The numbers of people increased today, and we will not stop. We will continue to walk to our goal, democracy. We want international countries to take more severe action.
Protests across Myanmar have been ongoing for more than 2 weeks, and they're showing no signs of slowing down. In Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, thousands gathered to chant and hold placards of their former leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. Suu Kyi's elected government was overthrown by the army earlier this month, bringing an end to a decade of civilian rule. The military claims there was fraud in elections in November, but the Electoral Commission has dismissed that. International condemnation of Myanmar's military rulers is growing. In a post on Twitter, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has repeated his call for a return to civilian rule. France, Singapore and the UK have also condemned the violence. And even Facebook has deleted the army's main page.
In line with our global policies, we've removed the Tatmadaw True News Information team page from Facebook for repeated violations of our community standards, prohibiting incitement of violence and coordinating harm.
Activists are calling for even bigger protests on Monday. Liz Whittaker, CGTN.
So here, the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has said all adults in the UK will be offered their first dose of a coronavirus vaccine by the end of July. That's 3 months ahead of the original target. More than 17 million people have already received their first jab since the UK started its rollout programme in December. The head of the National Health Service says there are early signs the programme is contributing to a fall in hospital admissions. Well, the Prime Minister is due to hold a final meeting with senior ministers about how to ease England's lockdown before setting out the full roadmap, as it's being called, on Monday. Guy Henderson is following all developments for us, joins us now live from London. Guy, thanks very much for joining us. What are we expecting then from the Prime Minister on Monday?
Well, it's widely expected that Boris Johnson will announce the reopening of all schools in England on the 8th of March. There have been some concerns expressed by scientists and school leaders about that, but it does look as though it's got pretty broad cross-party political support in Parliament. The leader of the main opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has now said he would support that broader, more rapid reopening on the 8th of March, if indeed it is confirmed on Monday. It's also thought likely that 2 people from different households will be able to socialise in outdoor settings from that date as well. At the moment, they're allowed to meet up only to exercise. The other big question is what, if any, commitments might the government make beyond that first step in the weeks and months afterwards? This has been a long and hard lockdown, and a lot of people, a lot of individuals, a lot of businesses are desperate for just a little bit of clarity.
Hello, hi.
Soldiers have been helping British healthcare workers on the front line this week. There's exhaustion, but also increasing hope. Case numbers, deaths and hospitalisations are all falling. And now UK Health Minister Matt Hancock says one of the world's most advanced vaccine rollout plans is about to speed up even more.
But we are able, from today, to be able to announce that we will be offering a vaccine to all those who are over 50 and in the top 9 priority groups by the 15th of April, and then to all adults by the end of July.
Rewind to early January, and the picture was entirely different.
As I speak to you tonight, our hospitals are under more pressure from COVID than at any time since the start of the pandemic.
England was headed into lockdown again, and it didn't quite know when it might come out of it. A new coronavirus variant, it turned out, wasn't just more contagious, but possibly more deadly as well. Vaccines, said officials, would be the only path to freedom. That path's been found quicker than many expected. This weekend, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is finalising a roadmap to ease restrictions to be announced on Monday, with schools expected to reopen as a first step from the 8th of March. Amid growing calls for many restrictions to be eased through the spring, there are still potential trip-ups, though. On Sunday, surge testing was rapidly rolled out in the town of Brentwood, north of London, after a single case of the coronavirus variant first seen in South Africa. Hancock says those kinds of measures do work.
We do not yet have the confidence that the vaccine is as effective against the South Africa variant and the variant first seen in Brazil. But we do think that the measures that we've taken, both the enhanced contact tracing, really clamping down when you see one of these, and the measures at the border are reducing those new variants here.
Hopes are high that families and friends may soon be reunited. For staff in hospitals like these, though, there can be no going backwards.
Guy, to what extent does public opinion determine what the Prime Minister's going to say on Monday? We do know scientists are warning against loosening that lockdown too soon.
That's a really interesting question. It's such a difficult and tricky balance for governments, not just here, but across the world. It's one thing saying to people, ordering them to stay at home when there are pictures on the television of hospitals being nearly overwhelmed. It's quite different trying to persuade them to continue to do so at a time when all of the news points to, falling case numbers and impressive numbers of people being vaccinated across the United Kingdom as well. Here where I am in London, it certainly feels more relaxed as we sort of enter a bout of slightly warmer weather, and you have had senior members of, for example, the Conservative Party, that is the governing party here in the United Kingdom, who have even suggested, perhaps all mandatory restrictions, because of this positive data coming out at the moment, might be able to be removed by the end of April. But what you are continuing to hear from senior government scientists and from those at the highest level of government, the Health Secretary, of course, chief amongst them, and the Prime Minister himself, is caution. It is too early, in their view, to know whether, if those restrictions are eased despite the vaccine rollout, we may yet be able to see cases begin to go back up again.
Guy Henderson for the moment. Thanks very much indeed. Well, on Monday, schools in a majority of German states will begin reopening after weeks of closures to stop the spread of COVID-19. However, there are concerns rising now over the spread of virus mutations across the country despite harsh lockdown measures. Natalie Carney reports now from Munich.
While the weather has been warming up here in Germany, more and more people are heading back outdoors. Yet German health authorities are warning people not to become too apathetic. While Germany has been seeing a decreasing number of COVID-19 cases over the last few weeks, the Center for Disease Control, the Robert Koch Institute, is warning that the current levels are still too high. The country's 7-day R value, also known as the reproduction rate, has gone up, and there's concern that could indicate that the more contagious variants of the virus are are spreading faster in the country, despite the lockdown, which is set to end on March the 7th. Germany's health minister, Jens Spahn, has said that currently more than 20% of all COVID-19 cases in the country are the variant first identified in the UK.
The urge for an end to the lockdown is tangible. You can almost touch it, but we must be very cautious with openings in order not to lose what we have already achieved. Analysis by the Robert Koch Institute shows that the virus variant first discovered in the UK has spread across all of Germany. Almost 1 in 5 who test positive is infected with that variant of the virus.
Another mutation that initially appeared in South Africa and has been quickly spreading in parts of Austria and the Czech Republic, which borders Germany, has been on the rise here, despite border closures to those regions. This trend is even more concerning as schools and daycare centers in a number of German states, including Bavaria and Berlin, are set to reopen tomorrow, leading to calls for employees of these facilities to be bumped up the COVID-19 vaccine priority list. Currently, school employees are in priority group 3 and would therefore not be vaccinated until the summer. Chancellor Angela Merkel and the heads of the federal states have requested this from the Ministry of Health. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Munich.
Well, away from coronavirus, Guinea is expecting to receive more than 11,000 Ebola vaccines on Sunday. The World Health Organization said inoculations could begin next week to try to contain the epidemic in the West African country. Joy Kirukuk-Juma reports.
A team of experts was dispatched to the affected area immediately after the virus outbreak was announced in Zerekure. Samples collected from the area and taken for analysis in laboratories in the capital, Conakry, confirmed the worst. The country was once again facing a new wave of the Ebola virus.
This mission will seek to find out whether it is an old disease that has awakened in the body of the patient or whether it is from wild animals such as bats that are incriminated in the genesis. We also made contact with the WHO. This time we are going to use our fatal weapon against Ebola, which is vaccination.
The World Health Organization is sending 11,000 doses of Ebola vaccines to Guinea. Nearly 11,300 people died in the Ebola epidemic that gripped Guinea between 2013 and 2016. The deadly virus has re-emerged as the country struggles to contain COVID-19. Health experts say the new outbreak is likely to impact ongoing efforts against the coronavirus.
In addition to the psychosocial impact, the resurgence of Ebola will impact the country's economy as the government will spend more money. The National Health Security Agency is also obliged to carry out additional site-oriented strategies, and all these activities and equipment are expensive.
Growing concern continues to plague the residents of Conakry as the country ramps up its Ebola response.
When the virus appeared in 2014, things were not easy, especially for us who live in the interior of the country. Every day there were deaths, which is why we are worried.
I am very worried, and I hope that the government will immediately take every adequate measure to circumscribe the second wave in the Nzerekure area so that the virus does not spread throughout the entire territory as it did in the first time.
Guinea's health ministry said all confirmed cases had been isolated. These reported cases of Ebola virus are the first in West Africa since 2016. Joy Kirukuk-Juma, CGTN.
Well, still ahead here on The World Today. As Novak Djokovic wins his 9th Australian Open title, we take a look at the ever-changing shape of sporting events during a pandemic.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first 2 epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Thousands attend the funeral of a young protester killed in Myanmar. The UK prepares to reveal a roadmap out of lockdown as the Prime Minister vows every adult will get a vaccine by July. Now, crews in the United States state of Texas are working around the clock to restore power to thousands of homes, but millions of people remain without safe drinking water. Our correspondent, Edis Tiansan, has been speaking to some of the residents there.
A couple with disabilities, Brian and Leisha, rely on each other for a lot of their daily activities. Although they survived a deadly snowstorm together, its aftermath is proving to be even more difficult.
We had no water at all for the last 2 days because of the city having water problems. And we got online with our local water department, and they had no information at all.
Leisha could not cook without water, and getting supplies from the grocery store wasn't easy.
I went and I got these, and I got 10 of them. That's what we're living on, okay? The bread was gone, the milk was gone, the biscuits were gone. I mean, everything was empty.
Icy roads and dangerous driving conditions had crippled the supply chain, and some of the most essential items quickly went out of stock. Since then, Texas had to airlift bottled water to be distributed in various facilities.
Now we recognize that there are a lot of people who simply don't have the means to go into the grocery stores and purchase. They've been hit and having to deal with so much. And then while we're under the boil water notice, that even adds even greater pressure on them.
Here in Fort Worth, water treatment plants are fixed and the boil water order has been lifted, but hundreds of repair requests remain.
The challenge now is all the main breaks, which are bleeding the water off of the system and bleeding pressure off of the system. We have crews working 24/7. We have contractors that we have brought in to assist with the main break repairs.
Many cities across the state of Texas are now grappling with a major water crisis because their infrastructure wasn't equipped to deal with the record low temperatures we have seen over the last week. The state is now flying in hundreds of plumbers from out of state because the number of workers they have here in Texas isn't enough to deal with the extent of damage caused by this historic winter storm. Under these circumstances, life gets much harder for the vulnerable population.
Oh, it's hard on us because we can't take a bath, we can't do simple things, we have to take medicine, it's hard to find water, you know, we can't do normal things like we usually do to survive.
Thousands like them are still trying to survive the impact of one of the worst disasters their state has seen in decades. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Dallas, Texas.
Well, let's take a brief look now at some of the other news from around the world. 9 people have been injured after protests continued for a 5th night in Barcelona. That's after violence again broke out between demonstrators and police in the Spanish city. Anger has been rising recently over the jailing of the Spanish rapper Pablo Hasél, accused of glorifying terrorism and insulting Spanish royalty in his music. The protests have sparked debate about freedom of speech in the country. A plane landed safely in Denver, Colorado after parts of its engine fell off shortly after takeoff. Large pieces of the plane, including an engine casing, were seen scattered in a Denver suburb. The United Airlines flight had been bound for Hawaii. There are no reports of injuries for the 241 people on board or anyone on the ground. Israel has reopened large parts of its economy after nearly 2 months of lockdown, using a green pass system to lift some restrictions for people who've been vaccinated. Shops, malls and street markets are now open for everyone, but gyms, theatres, cinemas and other leisure sites and cultural events will only be able to be accessed by those who've had both doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. Thousands of football fans in Italy defied coronavirus restrictions by gathering outside a stadium ahead of a key match between AC Milan and Inter Milan. Supporters from both sides were singing chants at least 3 hours before kick-off. They also let off flares and smoke bombs when buses carrying the teams arrived. And Tehran has said the US must first lift sanctions on Iran if it wants to talk about salvaging the 2015 nuclear deal. The Foreign Minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, also reiterated Iran's stance that it will not make the first move to restore the pact with major powers. Well, last week, President Joe Biden's administration said it was ready to talk to Iran about both nations returning to the accord, which is aimed at preventing Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons while lifting most international sanctions. And voting for the second round of Niger's presidential election started at 8 o'clock local time on Sunday. More than 7.4 million people are eligible to vote. They're choosing between two political heavyweights to replace outgoing President Mahamadou Issoufou. Voters cast their ballots in 26,000 planned polling stations in 16 electoral constituencies right across the country. Now, Novak Djokovic has won his 9th Australian Open title. That's his 18th Grand Slam. However, holding the tournament during the coronavirus pandemic has been no easy task. And the fate of large sporting events continues to hang in the balance, as do all the social restrictions imposed on curbing the spread of the coronavirus. Well, sports journalist and broadcaster Paul Scott joins us now from London. Welcome to you, Paul. Thanks for talking to us. So, holding a tennis Grand Slam in the middle of a global pandemic with thousands of fans, pretty ambitious. How do you think it went in the end?
I think when organisers look back at this, they'll say logistically they will be pleased with how it's ended. Perhaps not financially, because Tennis Australia has taken a huge hit to actually get this event up and running. Tens of millions of dollars they've lost just to put the event on. They feared that if they didn't put the event on, then they could lose the Australian Open. It could become the Asia Open. It could move to Singapore or China. That was their fear. That was their concern. So they were absolutely desperate to get this event on. And they've pulled out all the stops to do just that. And I think when they look back on how it's gone over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks or so, they will be pleased with logistically how they've pulled it off. They've managed to get the players in and out, it seems, without any local cases of transmission, without bringing a surge of new cases into the state of Victoria. But as I say, they have taken a huge financial hit in doing so. But it does send a symbolic gesture, I suppose, to the rest of the world, the rest of the sporting calendar, that it can be done.
It must have been a steep learning curve. What do you think the lessons were then from the Australian Open, and particularly for the Japanese? How do you think those lessons might be applied to the Tokyo Olympics, which of course the Japanese are very worried about right now?
I think the biggest thing that we can take from what we've seen over the last month or so in Melbourne is that bubbles do tend to work, and that's perhaps one advantage that the organisers of the Tokyo Olympics will have, because obviously traditionally athletes come in and they stay in the athletes' village, which is purpose-built for them already. Normally with tennis Grand Slams, for example, the top players choose to hire houses or apartments themselves, Airbnbs, hotels. They're all spread out, which is not a problem that the Olympic organisers are going to have, because the athletes will all be in one place. So I think that will be a positive sign for the Tokyo organisers, that logistically, whatever protocols are in place, they'll be able to sort of keep the athletes in a bubble. But I think some of the other lessons that they're a bit harder to learn, for example, the European Football Championship, which is taking place across Europe this summer, that's in 12 different venues, and it's much harder to bubble up when you've got the geography is so dispersed in that way. And that's another problem for the Tokyo organisers, that unfortunately all these events aren't just taking place in one place like they did at the Australian Open, because you've got the athletics tracks, the velodrome, the swimming pool, so it will be slightly trickier.
Interesting you mentioned football, though, because in this country we've got used to seeing televised versions of football games and rugby games in fanless stadiums. But what do you think we lose specifically when there aren't loads of fans in one stadium? What do we lose in that live sporting event? And do you think we'll ever see crowds again?
I think we lose an awful lot, and I think that was highlighted this week when we did see fans back, because this is the third Grand Slam in the tennis calendar that's taken place since tennis returned in the middle of last year. We had the US Open in New York behind closed doors. We had the French Open in Paris when only 1,000 spectators were allowed in. Throughout various days over the last month, there have been 50% capacity inside Melbourne Park, which is around 30,000 fans or so. And we saw Nick Kyrgios's match in particular early on in week one, where the vociferous partisan home crowd were getting behind their player. And I think it just reminded the whole world of what we have been missing, because we've become accustomed in some respects to watching sport without spectators at the moment. And that's simply because that's the only option available to us. But I think it was just a teaser and a taster of what we saw this week of what we've been missing. As to whether we will see spectators back, I think most definitely we will. I'm not sure in what capacity, certainly for the Euros this summer, for the Olympic Games, whether fans will be allowed to fly in. I'm not so sure, but I think longer term, over the next 18 months, 2 years or so, if the vaccine rollout, of course, is successful, then I think everyone wants to see spectators return. It adds to the atmosphere, it adds to the quality of the performance, and of course, financially, it's hugely important for authorities and organisers as well.
Let's hope soon. Paul Scott, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. Now, Australia's Prime Minister has had his first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine as the nation starts its inoculation programme. Up to 4 million Australians are expected to receive their jab by March. Greg Navarro reports now from Melbourne.
On a day when a lot of Australians were focusing on the Australian Open taking place here in Melbourne, and in particular the men's finals are taking place Sunday night, the Prime Minister and a small group of people were actually getting their first vaccination shots. Now, the official rollout for Australia begins on Monday, but the Prime Minister and a couple of other people were touring a facility in Sydney, a vaccination site, and they decided to, in their words, use it to show people what it's like, what the experience is like, and to encourage as many Australians as possible. Included in that group was an 84-year-old World War II survivor. Now, as I mentioned, the official rollout kicks off on Monday all across the country. Tens of thousands of people will be getting their first shots. Now, these are mainly frontline workers as well as healthcare workers. They'll receive the Pfizer vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which will go to the majority of Australians. It's something that will actually be produced right here in Melbourne. As far as epidemiologists are concerned, they want to see at least 85% of the population vaccinated. They said that that's the only way to see any kind of herd immunity built up against this virus. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Melbourne.
Well, that's just about it for The World Today. Thanks very much for watching. We are available, of course, on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion as well, of course, as at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app. From me and all the team in London, thanks for watching. Goodbye.